Oh, hey guys. Just me and my dog Nora here. And I've been having a bit of a problem that I was hoping you guys could help me out with. So, my dog Nora, during the daytime, she's so cute, has been getting a little bit sad. I mean, look at this face. This is just the saddest face that she's had during the day. Now, the reason she's been really sad is because my wife goes to work and I go to work and she's here all day, all by herself. And I thought, wouldn't it be really cool if I could send her to doggy daycare all day? The only problem is I don't really have the extra money to do that. So I started to think a little bit about Nora and I started to think, what could I do? So I came up with the idea, bake sale. Now, there's a big problem with that. I'm not really the best baker. I don't really know how to make great cookies. But I have this thing right here, which is my trusty bread maker. Now, I decided, what if I made 20 loaves of bread and I tried to sell those loaves of bread? So I got out my bread maker, I got out my food scale, and I got out my King Arthur flour, which is the best flour around. Now, I know that in order to make a loaf of bread with a great recipe, it takes 544 grams of flour. So I started to think to myself, if I make 20 loaves of bread, how many total grams of flour is that going to be? So I was wondering if you guys could help me out with that a little bit so that I can make some bread and send Nora to doggy daycare. So right from the start, I know that each loaf of my bread has 544 grams. And if I really want to make a good bit of money for Nora, I'm going to try to make 20 loaves of bread just to get a lot of, cash so that I can help pay for her doggy daycare. Now, when I'm doing this, I'm thinking of 544 over and over and over 20 different times, which makes me think of 544 times 20. Remember, if I wanted to, I could just do 544 grams plus 544 grams plus 544 grams over and over and over. But multiplication is a much, much, much quicker way to do this. Now, before I go through and think about exactly how many grams I'm going to need, I really like to use some estimation strategies. So one thing I'm going to do is we're going to talk about what would be an answer that is too low and what would be an answer that is too high. So when I'm thinking of 544 times 20, the first thing I notice is that this number here, 544, is really close to the number 500. So really what I'm thinking is 500 times 20, or in other words, 20 groups of 500. The reason I'm thinking of that is because the number 500 is a lot easier to work with. Now, I don't know right off the top of my head how much is in 20 groups of 500, but I'm thinking, well, what if I just take a couple 500s? So I'm thinking, what about 500 times 2? I know that 500 times 2 is definitely going to be too low because it's only two groups of 500 instead of 20. And right off the bat, I know that 500 times 2 is 1,000. So I'm going to say that my answer that is too low is 1,000 because that's only two groups of 500, and I need 20 groups of 544. So I'm going to say my answer that is too low is going to be 1,000. Now, I also like to think of what type of answers would be too high. Now, in this case, again, I'm looking at 544 times 20. And again, I'm not really knowing exactly what that is in my head. So what I'm thinking is, if I want an answer that's too big, let's look at a number that is bigger than 544. Let's round up to the next 100, which would be 600. Now again, the reason I'm looking at the hundreds is because these numbers are much, much, much easier to work with. So I'm going to start with that. So I'm thinking of 600 times 20 instead of 544 times 20. And when I'm thinking of 600 times 20, again, I don't know that right off the bat. But what I do know is that if I take 600 times 2, that gives me 1,200. Now, I could do that over and over and over a number of times. That would be one way to do it. I could think of how many 600s there's going to be. 18 more of those. That's going to be pretty tough. But one strategy I want to show you is the idea of multiplying by 10. Now, you may not know right off the bat how to multiply by 10, but I can tell you that really when you multiply by 10, by a whole number, all you're doing is adding an extra 0 to the end. So 600 times 10 is the same as 6,000. So I know if I multiply 600 times 10, that's going to be 6,000. Which tells me then that if I multiply 600 times 20, that's just going to be double that. And double 6,000 would be 12,000. Now, I know that if I'm using 600 here instead of 544, I'm using a number that's too big, so I know my answer then is going to be too big. So 12,000 is the number I'm going to look at as my answer that is too high. So just looking back, we have an answer too low. We only looked at 2 groups instead of 20. And remember, we used the number 500 instead of 544. So we used a lower number, and we also used fewer groups, and we got 1,000. For my answer that's too high, we used a larger number. We used 600 instead of 544. And I actually used 20 groups in this case, but 20 groups of 600, which gave me 12,000. And we used this idea of multiplying by 10, where we can just add that extra 0 behind my number here, as long as we're looking at a whole number. Now, I at this point have figured out that my answer has to be somewhere between 1,000 and 12,000. Now, a lot of people think, well, what's the point of that? You still don't know the answer. Well, just by doing that, I've really narrowed down my possibility of answers because I know it has to be somewhere between these two. And a lot of times when we say, does my answer make sense? We don't know, but if we're looking at this, if our answer doesn't fall between those two numbers, we know that it doesn't make sense. Just keep that in mind. Now, when I'm working this, to really get an exact answer, I'm going to look at this method called the turtle method, and I'll show you a different way in a second to do this one. Starting off, remember we're multiplying by the ones place, so we're looking, in this case, at the problem 544 times 0, which 0 groups of 544 is just going to give me 0. Now, remember that my second problem here, we're looking at the tens place here. So we're looking at 544 times 2 tens, which would be 20, is what we're looking at in the second problem. And remember when we multiply by a multiple of 10, which this is because it ends in a 0, remember that we're always going to get a 0 in the ones place, so that's why we put this here, because we're now multiplying by the tens place. So I'm going to do here, I'm going to do 2 tens times 4 ones, which is going to be 8 tens. I'm going to do 2 tens times 4 tens, which is going to be an 800. And I'm going to do 2 tens times 5 hundreds, which is going to give me 10,000. So my final answer here is going to be 10,880 grams for my 20 loaves of bread. Now notice that this answer does fit right in between these two answers. So when I go to the end and say, does my answer make sense? Yes, it does, because it fits between my answer that I said was too low and my answer that I said was too high. So we really want to think about how we can use estimation when we're multiplying to figure out whether our answers make sense. And I want to remind you just one more time, thinking about an answer that's too low. So in this case, what I did was I multiplied by a number that was smaller,
and I used a number that was close but slightly smaller. And then when I was thinking of an answer that's too high, I used a number that was close but slightly bigger, and I used this concept of multiplying by tens where we can just add this extra zero here. So use some of these strategies and see if you can sort of estimate your answers and see if they make sense. But we're looking at a total here of 10,880 grams of flour if I want to send Nora to doggy daycare.
Ah, that smells really good. Oh, thanks, guys. It looks like we got the answer because I got my bread right here. It's really, really, really hot. So let me take it out here. Oh, it smells really good. We got a nice, fresh loaf of bread. And that's going to be a great loaf to make for our bake sale. And we are going to have one really, really happy dog. Thanks, guys.